Hello, my beautiful friends. How is 2023 so far? I hope you all had a great Christmas and that the new year is treating you well. Hello, my lovelies. How is 2023 so far? I hope you had a great Christmas and the new year is treating you fabulously. I ended the year with a terrible sunburn and I am now entering 2023 shedding my skin like a snake, which is a wonderful metaphor, but not so great in reality. So there's that. But apart from that, everything is good here. And I am sorry for my absence. Christmas is a bit of a tricky time for me, but I'm back. For those of you who are new here, welcome. My name is Emma Carrington. And if you are interested in true crime and justice, you are in the right place. However, short disclaimer, we do discuss true crime cases involving domestic abuse and domestic homicide on this channel. So if this is not the kind of content you are looking for, I completely understand, and thanks for stopping by. If you do stick around though, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button. It helps to push these videos out to more people, and by doing so, together we can spread awareness of the warning signs of domestic abuse that people may otherwise overlook. Thank you to all of you who have subscribed. I really do appreciate your support, and I hope that going into 2023 and beyond, we can really make a big difference in this space. I'm just going to take a moment to go to the Red Heart Campaign's website. This website is a memorial to all the women and children who have lost their lives in Australia in the last year and all the years prior to 2022. Well, all that they're aware of. But just in 2022, there were 57 women and children whose deaths on this website were listed as being caused by domestic violence or as intimate partner homicide. 57 women and children were not safe in their own homes a lot of the time because of someone who said they loved them. 57 out of 99 total in 1 year. And this goes on year after year. There has been no change. And before you have a go at me, I know that it's not just women and children, but isn't that even more reason to get to the bottom of domestic abuse and stamp it out once and for all? This affects everyone. Please educate everyone you can and point out red flags to those you love when you see them. We have got to look out for each other. Wow, I'm starting the year off deep. Okay, sorry. Today, we're actually going to be looking at a case that is represented by one of these red hearts, and it's the case of Mackenzie Anderson. So this case is quite a recent one, and it's quite local to me, but being a recent one means that there is no resolution, which is extra tough. Let me introduce you, though, to Mackenzie Anderson. Mackenzie was a beautiful young lady from the Newcastle area. Her mum, Tabitha, describes her as the life of the party, saying that she was vibrant, bubbly and feisty, saying she was always giggling. However, she also says that this happy face Mackenzie put forward was hiding a lot of pain, both from things in her past and also what she was living through presently. Tabitha says that this is how Mackenzie was pushing through and moving forward. At 16, Mackenzie had developed an addiction to methamphetamine. However, by the time she was 19, she'd been clean for 3 years. She did recognise the nature of addiction though, and referred to herself as someone in recovery, saying in a social media post, quote, "I've been clean from ice for 3 years now, and I still count myself as a person in recovery. Only in the process of fixing myself from being an addict is when I found out who I really was." It was also around this time, when she was 19, that Mackenzie had her little boy. From the moment he was born, he was her life. By all accounts, she was a wonderful mum who was besotted with her little boy. The relationship with her son's father didn't work out though, so for a few months it was just the two of them. Then Mackenzie began dating Tyrone Thompson, and according to her mum Tabitha, the red flags were quite evident from very early on. So much so that she would tell Mackenzie that Tyrone worried her, that he scared her. The first thing that she pointed to was the intensity that Tyrone brought to the relationship, the excessive gift giving and over-the-top affection, which, if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll recognize as love bombing. For those of you who haven't, stick around, you'll get sick of hearing me say it. And if you want homework, that is more info on love bombing, you will find a full video regarding that abuse tactic along with others on my second channel, Surviving the Love Bomb. And you will find a link to that in the description box below. But enough of that. Tabitha also said that Tyrone was very possessive of Mackenzie, even in the very early days of the relationship. She explains that they'd only been together about a month when Mackenzie had gone to visit her mum. She was going to be staying a week or two, and Tyrone was constantly calling, wanting to know what she was up to and when she'd be back. Tabitha says he came across as obsessive. Her mum says that when she first met Tyrone, she was instantly put off by his constant joking put-downs of Mackenzie and any of her achievements. Tabitha explains how Mackenzie had saved up and paid for a car, but when Tyrone saw it, he instantly told her that the car was a piece of shit. Tabitha went back at him saying, no, actually, it's a good little car, but she recognised the tactic of these constant negative jabs. This is something else that's quite common in abusive relationship. The abuser will make snide remarks, constantly chipping away at their partner's confidence. And if anyone pulls them up on it, they laugh and say, I was only joking, don't be so sensitive, or get a sense of humour. As the relationship went on, Tyrone tried to isolate Mackenzie from her family, especially her mum, trying to cause fights between the two of them. This is also a very common tactic, especially if an abuser recognises that someone in your family sees through them. That person's insight doesn't serve them, so they're going to try and remove them from the equation. Not only does it mean that they have control over the narrative and you don't have another perspective coming in, it also gives them a bit of a sense of security, because they believe if you feel like you can't turn to your family for help, you are more likely to stay with and put up with them, believing that you have no other options. Tabitha pointed this out to Mackenzie. It's so much easier to see these signs from the outside and without the cloud of emotion to skew your judgment. But of course, like most of us, we have to learn these things for ourselves. But the couple weren't even together a year before Mackenzie called off the relationship. She pressed charges and applied for an ABO against Tyrone. She'd been documenting all the abuse, and her social media was flooded with photos and heartbreaking quotes that documented what she was going through. Tyrone was charged. He faced court and was convicted of the stalking and intimidation, common assault, and malicious damage charges. He was sentenced in September of 2021 to 9 months in jail for these serious domestic violence offences against Mackenzie. However, he was released on parole 4 months and 2 weeks later for good behaviour, which is just ridiculous. But you have to ask, what part of the justice system isn't ridiculous at this point? Anyway, so he was released, and the next day he apparently, allegedly, visited his father Jason Thompson's home, and after a drinking session to celebrate his release, he allegedly assaulted his father and was charged. He appeared in court that afternoon and was released on conditional bail, in spite of his previous domestic violence convictions and the fact that he was on parole. Superintendent Humphrey said, quote, There is an AVO in play, but the circumstances that have occurred since he was released on parole are under investigation. I won't go into what's happened since he's been on parole. There have been interactions with police. So despite having been just released on parole and having just committed another violent act, breaching an AVO, and the police having knowledge of all of this, allegedly, his parole was not revoked. He wasn't returned to jail. No, he was just let go on his merry way, free as a bird. So he continued to harass Mackenzie. She told friends that Tyrone was contacting her and being weird, saying that he had just got out of jail and couldn't even last 24 hours without harassing her. 16 days after his release, on the 25th of March 2022, at around 10:40 p.m, Mackenzie Anderson called 000 to tell them that her ex had just broken into her unit and was in violation of an ADVO, which is an apprehended domestic violence order. The police were dispatched, and they and paramedics arrived only minutes later to find a devastating scene. Mackenzie was out the front of her home bleeding profusely, but breathing, just barely. Tyrone had stabbed her in excess of 20 times and then stomped on her head. It was only moments after emergency services arrived that Mackenzie took her last breath. She was pronounced dead at the scene. She was 21 years old. One of her friends said that they believed she was holding on to make sure that her little boy was taken care of. The police found her child, who was only 2 weeks shy of his second birthday at the time, covered in his mum's blood, but otherwise unharmed. The dreadful scene shocked first responders and left a seasoned senior police officer severely shaken. Tyrone was apprehended at the scene and taken to John Hunter Hospital to have an injury to his hand, allegedly sustained in the attack, tended to, and he was eventually charged with murder, breaching an AVO, and aggravated enter of a dwelling with intent. In May, he faced Newcastle local court. He entered no plea and did not request bail, but the magistrate formally denied bail anyway. And that is where he is today, sitting and waiting to present his pathetic excuses to the court. When that happens, I will update you all so you can be as infuriated as I am. In the meantime, Tabitha, Mackenzie's mum, has been advocating for change to the parole laws and working at raising awareness about unhealthy relationships. According to the Sydney Morning Herald, the police also alleged that the day before Mackenzie was killed, Tyrone breached another domestic violence order in Berkeley Vale on the Central Coast, which is a couple of hours south of Newcastle. 4 days after Mackenzie's death, over 1,000 Novocastrians came together to march for nearly a kilometre along Wharf Road in a desperate plea to reform domestic violence laws and improve funding to better assist victims. The event was put together by the founder of What Were You Wearing, Sarah Williams, at the request of Mackenzie's family and friends.
This follows the stabbing death over the weekend of a young local mother.
Yes, Georgie, thousands of people in Newcastle have come to rally against domestic violence after the alleged murder of 21-year-old mother Mackenzie Anderson, who was allegedly murdered by her ex-partner, who was on parole for domestic violence at the time of the alleged killing. Tonight, thousands have showed up. Ms. Anderson was very vocal on social media about being a victim of domestic violence, very brave at speaking up and encouraging other women to come forward. So tonight, her friends and family and the people of Newcastle have rallied to give her a voice.
Being through domestic violence myself, I stand against it so much. Sorry. Yeah.
It's very brave of you.
It means a lot. I'm marching on behalf of so many women I know and myself who have gone through domestic violence situations, and especially beautiful Gabby that lost her life 3 years ago.
There needs to be action from our political leaders on this instead of just silence. Too many women are dying.
Georgie, such strong and powerful words from this crowd after 14 women across Australia have been killed as a result of alleged domestic violence just this year alone.
It's an appalling statistic, Emma, thank you. And if you or anyone you know is a victim of domestic violence, you can call 1-800-RESPECT.
Mackenzie knew many people within the organisation, so this was personal for them. Sarah said, quote, "More needs to be done by policymakers and people in power who can actually make real change and reform laws." She explained that the protesters were demanding more funding for organisations that support victims of domestic and sexual violence, particularly when it comes to accommodation for victims. These services are terribly underfunded, leaving victims with nowhere to go. Marsha Chapman, the executive manager of Jenny's Place, which is a domestic violence and homelessness support centre, echoed Sarah's call for funding for accommodation, saying, quote, "With the current housing crisis in Newcastle, we desperately need more crisis accommodation for women escaping violence. At the moment, services are at capacity, so women are staying in unsafe situations because there's nowhere to go." One man has seemingly come up with an answer. The Australian Housing Initiative was founded by Ian Ugarte. Ian has a background in property development, and though it was making him mega money, he felt empty. He wanted to give back to the community, and so he came up with the catchphrase, "It needs to make sense before it makes dollars." This is a snippet of an interview he did with Mamma Mia's podcast, The Quickie.
We know that for women fleeing a violent home, their first stop is often a refuge shelter. But that situation's not a permanent solution. So what options do women have when they've often fled with little more than the clothes on their and their children's backs? How do you pay rent when you need to head back out into the real world? Ian Ugarte is the founder of the Australian Housing Initiative, a qualified tradie, educator and housing affordability advocate. Ian's very lucrative business in property development was making him a ton of money. But the stress and toll it took on him mentally, morally and emotionally pushed him to the very edge. But it also started him down the path of helping domestic violence victims.
I was a full-time developer developing big blocks into small pieces of land and putting large-size houses on them, and found that it wasn't a very fulfilling job title, really. I was 12 hours from suicide, and I realised then that I had to make a change and had to start giving back to community for me to have a better change and a better effect. And so we came up with a catchphrase of "it needs to make sense before it makes dollars." So it has to help the community first in a positive way, and secondly, it needs to have a financial benefit as well. So Australian Housing Initiative was born on creating more housing in Australia to be able to fix the housing issue we've got by using mum and dad investors to be able to fulfil what government can't at the moment.
So talk me through exactly what that does.
What we found was that there's 60 to 80% of the people looking for accommodation are singles and couples, and 60 to 80% of the accommodation available for them to rent are 3, 4 and 5 bedroom houses. So it's not that we have a housing affordability issue, we have a size issue in Australia. We continue to build large homes. So what we do is we take those larger homes and we use policies from around the country to convert them into little micro apartments where everyone has their own sitting area, their own bedroom, their own bathroom and a kitchenette, and they share one communal area in the house, which is the kitchen and the laundry. And what we found is that creates a huge amount of community, and it saves the resident 1/2 to 1/3 off their normal weekly rent, and starts providing housing for the middle of the market so that people can actually start saving for their own house and hopefully buy within 3 to 5 years.
Well, talk to me about how it came to work for victims of domestic violence.
We realised about 2 or 3 months into lockdown, the Google search reference for domestic violence had gone up by 75%. And, we had a home of a friend of ours that was quite large. They had bought another place and they were moving out, and they were going to put it on the rental market. They had experience as a charity provider for domestic violence. And I said to them, how about we create some micro apartments out of your property? Then that way you've got somewhere where domestic violence people can go to. So the biggest issue we found was that those people that are in domestic violence situations can't find the strength to leave. And when they do leave, they go into crisis accommodation. But then at that point in time, when the crisis accommodation's finished, they don't really have any stepping stone to get into the rental market. So we created this domestic violence house It took us 48 hours to complete the project. We converted a 4-bedroom house into 5 micro apartments. And within the space of 3 weeks, it was full, and the women in there are just extraordinarily happy and grateful. I mean, they've got an instant community, they've got an instant support network, and then instant strength, because they're now finding themselves in a place where they don't need to go back to the perpetrator, and that's one of the biggest issues with domestic violence.
I'll put the link to the whole episode in the description box below. It just goes to show how many people are out there trying so hard to make a difference in the domestic violence space. I really hope that the people at the top that can affect real and lasting change get their acts together and start fulfilling the promises they keep spouting anytime another woman and her children die. Mackenzie's mum, Tabitha, is on Instagram. You can find her at They Are Our Daughters. She's also preparing to begin a podcast of the same name. Tabitha has shared custody of Mackenzie's son and is doing her best to raise him in a home filled with love. I'm amazed at all the advocacy work that she's done since Mackenzie's murder. She is a strong and courageous woman. I don't know if I could be so strong. I think I'd be curled up in a ball, unable to function at all. My heart goes out to all of Mackenzie's family and friends as they face a new year without her shining light. That is all I have for you today, my loves. If the content of this case has raised any concerns for you regarding your own relationship or that of a loved one, please reach out for help. There's a list of resources in the description box below. I thank you again for joining me this week, and until next time, please take care of yourselves and be kind to one another. I'll see you soon. Bye.